You'll see what I mean once we get started. Okay, so absolute value applications are just like word problems or like real world scenarios where you're going to use an absolute value. What I have noticed is that the types of questions that could potentially be on the EOC, they're more concerned with you being able to write the inequality or the equation than they are with you being able to actually solve it. Because you solving this, you'll see once we start looking at them, you'll be like, I could have solved that in 5th grade. So the math isn't necessarily difficult. It's about being able to write the inequality the correct way, okay? So I'd almost say writing the inequality is harder than doing the math, if that makes sense. Okay, so it says, at the TX Design Company, the average starting salary for a new designer is $33,600, but the actual salary could differ from the average by as much as $1,560. So it says write an inequality to determine if the salary X falls within this range. Solve the inequality and then write the conclusion. So again, like I said, the solving part is the easy part. The expected salary is $33,600, so we're going to say X minus $33,600. So whatever value you have that's expected, that is what's going to go inside the absolute value sign. Okay, and then when it says that they expect it to differ from the average by as much as 1,560, that means they expect it to be within that amount, like in between whatever 33,600 minus that number is and whatever 33,600 plus that number is. Does that make sense? Okay, so we're going to say that that is less than or equal to 1,560. So it's going to differ by less than that amount. It could differ by exactly that amount at the very most, or something less than that amount. Does that make sense? Okay, so that was the hardest part. Now we just have to go through and solve it. And a lot of you guys would be like, Ms. Rice, if I did this problem, I wouldn't even write that. I would just be like 33,600 minus 1,560, and I'd write the lower number. And then I would do 33,600 plus the number, right? Most of us would probably do that. It's fine if you want to do that to write your sentence and solve it. I'm okay with you guys doing that because these are pretty simple to solve. But I'm going to go ahead and just continue on because we learned how to solve inequalities yesterday, right? So if we were to do this like the math 3 way instead of the 5th grade level math way, what would be the math 3 way of doing this problem? If we relate it to what we talked about yesterday. We'd be like, that's a less than sign, which means it's a sandwich, right? So we'd say, okay, let me do negative 1560, write it as a sandwich, put the X minus in the middle, and then what would we do? But not subtract, add. So we're going to add it to all of them. Is that what you were talking about? Yeah, so when we did the equation ones, we just drew arrows down and said we had 2 different scenarios. But yesterday when we did inequalities, we learned that they could be sandwiched, so they could be between those 2 values, or they could be outside of those 2 values. So this one is saying it's in between those 2 values. All right, so we've got X is in between. Anyone get their calculator out to check? I had a student once say, Miss Rice, you're my calculator. And I was like, no, I'm not. Do the math yourself. And then I stopped showing my calculator screen. I would like calculate it off to myself, write the answer and cover the answer, and move on to the next question. Don't make me be your calculator. Anyone figure out what the first number is? Yep, $32,040. And then the higher end salary could be, yes. Okay, so here's the inequality. That's the first answer. Then we solved the inequality. And then now we're going to write the conclusion in a sentence. So we're going to say the starting salary for a new designer is between $32,040 and $35,160. So when you practice these problems, if you don't want to do the Math 3 level way of solving, I'm okay with that. If you want to say, I could have got those two numbers on my own just by adding and subtracting the 1,560, I'm okay with you doing that to solve it, that's fine. But really important you understand how to write the inequality, because that's the part that you would actually be tested on if it was like on the EOC. They would give you a scenario, and then the multiple choice answers would be like different things that look like this. So you have to understand how the inequality gets written. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, example 2. Caleb is a machinist at Golden Eagle Chopper Shop. To ensure the reliability of motorcycle engines produced at the shop, Caleb machines each cylinder to a 4.01 inch diameter with a tolerance of 0.0002. Does anyone know how we read that decimal out loud? To 10 thousandths. Yeah. So the first one is tenth, then hundredth, then thousandth, then 10,000. So that's 2 10,000ths of an inch if we were to read it accurately. So this is 4 and 1 100th of an inch, and then 2 10,000ths of an inch. So that's like got to be pretty accurate, right? Which makes sense if you're talking about like machinery and engines and stuff like that. Write an inequality to determine an unacceptable diameter. So if you think about writing an inequality, are we going to want to do a sandwich this time? Say it has to be in between this and this? No, because we want to know what's unacceptable. So if we're saying it's in between this lower end and higher end, we're saying what's acceptable. We want to know what's on the outside. Does that make sense? Okay, so we start off by putting x minus, and we put what the goal is. That's 4.01. And then if we were looking at what was okay, we would do a less than sign. But we're looking at what's not okay, so we're going to do a greater than sign. Okay, should I put an equal to or not put an equal to? I've got 0.0002. We are doing what is not acceptable. Is it acceptable to have this exactly? Yes, so you could have that, which means since we are doing what is not acceptable, we are not going to put the equal to. Does that make sense? Okay. So these are the answers that we cannot have. Okay, so that was important. Do you guys want to do it the 5th grade way or the Math 3 way? Math 3? Okay, so we're going to say this is greater. So we're going to say x minus 4.01, and we're going to have them going opposite directions. Or x minus 4.01 is greater than 0.0002. So instead of saying we're sandwiched in between those numbers, we're saying we're going opposite directions. One less than, one greater than. Okay, and then what do I do next? Okay, so x is less than 4.0098 inches, or 4.0102 inches. Okay, so we're going to say the diameter is unacceptable if it is less than 4.0098 inches or more than 4.0102 inches. Anyone feeling salty you have to write sentences? Students are always like, Ms. Rice, this is an English class. I'm so used to writing math that when I have to write the sentences, my hand kind of cramps up. It's like, oh, that was a lot of writing. Okay. Feeling pretty good about that one? All right. So one thing, we're going to put this at the top. In general, these problems, if it says less than, those are acceptable values. And it could be less than or equal to. It depends on the wording of the problem. So I'm not going to put the equal to. Well, actually, I'll say this. This or this could be the acceptable answers. And then greater than or equal to tend to be the unacceptable values or the ones that are going to get rejected. So that is generally the case when you do these word problems. They could try to phrase it in such a way that it would be backwards, but it'd be kind of hard to do. So most of them are going to fit this, but not necessarily all of them. Okay. An essay contest requires that essay entries consist of 500 words with a deviation of less than 30 words. And then we're going to write the absolute value inequality. So what's the goal? But what's the goal? What's the value that would be like the perfect goal? 500. So we're going to say x minus 500. Okay. And then how far off of that goal is it acceptable to be? 30. Can it be exactly 30? Do we need to put an equal to? But look at what the wording says. Less than. So they're saying if you have 530 words, you're done. It can only be 529 words. Well, this is less than. This is less than 30. The alligator eats the 30, but this side is less than that. Have you guys? Did you guys?
I still use that.
The alligator. Yeah. I never learned alligator, but when I first started teaching, a student said that to me, and I was like, "What?" And they showed me like the alligator eats the bigger thing, and I was like, "That." So whenever students have a hard time, I just go back to the alligator. Yeah. All right. So we've got x minus 500 is less than 30, so you can't deviate by 30. It's got to be less than that. All right, so do you guys want to solve it the 5th grade way or the math 3 way? You guys like, we are in high school. We're going to solve it the math 3 way. Okay, the 5th grade way. Are you ready? What's 30 less than 500? 470. What's 30 more? Okay, it's between those. Yeah, the 5th grade way is kind of nice, right? Okay.
It's saying a lot more.
Yeah, it's... Do you see how they both make sense, though? One is like, I'm being a little bit more formal. You know, it's like, oh, I'm putting the inequality signs there, because if you write it like this, it's like, are you saying you can have those, that it's equal to those? With these, you have to write a sentence to make sense of your answer. With the 5th grade way, you have to write the sentence. With the math 3 way, you don't necessarily have to write the sentence for your answer to make sense, because your answer has the symbols in it. So... All right, so we're going to say the essay must be, and how should I phrase it so they know it can't be 470 exactly or 530 exactly? More than 470 words, but less than 530 words. Okay, so before we're going to do number 4, I'm going to jump back up to number 2 and help you, for some of you guys who might have had a hard time with this symbol. So this one said unacceptable, right? Okay, so if we wanted to know, go ahead and write this on here because we probably should have said it before we did it. The acceptable option would have been if it was less than or equal to 0.0002. That would have been acceptable, right? If it was less than or equal to 0.0002. Based on the wording of the problem, that was acceptable. So that means that unacceptable was like the exact opposite of that, which was just greater than 0.0002. So, depends on the problem. Okay. So, since acceptable had the equal to, that meant that unacceptable could not. Does that make sense? Okay. Acceptable was less than, so unacceptable was greater than. All right, so if we look at example 4, it says a candy manufacturer puts 240 pieces of candy into a bag. The bag can be off by 8 pieces at the most. So what is acceptable? So 240 is the goal, and 8 pieces is acceptable. Okay, so we're going to say less than or equal to 8 would have been acceptable. Does that make sense? 8 pieces at the most. Okay, so what would be unacceptable? 232, and you would just flip the sign so you'd say greater than 8. Does that make sense? Okay. And then you were helping us solve it the 5th grade way, right? So what was the 5th grade way? Yeah. Okay. Okay. So let's go ahead and write the sentence to make sense of our answer, right? We've got our numbers. So, but we are writing what is unacceptable. So less than or equal to 8 is acceptable, but the question wants us to know what's an unacceptable amount of candy. And so we are not including the 8 because that would have been okay. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's go ahead and write our sentence. So how should we phrase this to show that it's unacceptable? We're gonna say what's unacceptable because that's what they asked, right? So we're gonna say you cannot have less than 232, which would be like 231. You cannot have less than 232 or more than 248. What's acceptable? So it's not always like I could be very creative and write a problem that's not the case, but most of the time. So we're going to say it is unacceptable to have less than 232 or more than 248 pieces of candy in the bag. So we're going to make sure that however they phrased the question, we phrase it in a similar way when we write the answer. So if they asked about unacceptable, we answer about unacceptable. Okay? All right. How are your brains feeling about that? Pretty good? Okay. So I think